Good evening. This is the December 20th, 2018 meeting of the Monroe Planning and Zoning Commission, meeting in Town Council Chambers. It's now 7 p.m. Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And will the commission please introduce yourselves, starting on my right?
Brian Condon, alternate.
Kenneth Wilk, alternate.
Jonathan Formicella, alternate.
Bruno Maiani, commissioner.
Leanne Ambrosi, Commissioner.
William Porter, Chairman.
Walt Lisi, secretary.
Will Agresta, Planning and Zoning Administrator.
Rick Schultz, Town Planner.
Laura Burkowski, acting recording secretary.
And Commissioner O'Reilly is absent this evening. Will, who's next on the...
Since we sat everyone last time, the rotation would be to Jonathan.
Jonathan, you're seated. Organizational and administrative matters, none. General public participation. Is there anyone who would like to address the commission on an issue that's not related to an open application or hearing? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Item number 5, general appointments, we have none. Moving on to public hearings. Okay, instructions for the audience. There are 2 sets of microphones for both public address and recording of the proceedings. Due to the need for recording, it is important to stand at the microphone at all times and speak into it loudly and clearly in order that everyone in the room can hear and to capture what is being said. Individuals speaking from the seat will not be heard and will not be recognized to speak. Order of the hearing of an application. Points of order and responses will be entertained. Exhibits will be read for the record. Applicant and/or representatives will present the application and will answer commission questions. The floor will be open to those in favor. The floor will be open to those opposed. The floor will be opened to general questions or comments. The floor will be open to the applicant, who may take the opportunity for closing remarks or rebuttal, after which discussion will close. The applicant or his representatives are the final speakers. No comment shall be accepted from anyone unless recognized by the chair. All questions and comments shall be addressed to the chair, who will determine if an answer shall be provided and by whom. There shall be absolutely no discussion between speakers and audience. The commission has no intention to limit the right of any person to speak, but asks that speakers try not to be repetitive. Please try to present new information. If something has been said before, the commission would invite you to indicate your agreement with previous speakers. At no time shall there be displays of emotion such as applause, cheering, shouting, or similar noise. This is critical as this hearing is being recorded. If this happens, you will be cautioned. A vote or demonstration by a show of hands, standing by the audience, or similar action will not be recognized. All parties are requested not to talk between themselves while the hearing is in progress. If you feel a need to talk, please step out into the lobby. All speakers, when recognized, must advance to the microphone to speak. Please state your name and address for the record. The chairman reserves the right to cut off discussion if it is not relevant to the application or is presented in an inappropriate manner. This is a legal proceeding, much the same as what would occur in a courtroom setting. We request that all parties observe the proper decorum that would be observed in that setting. Please turn off all cell phones or similar devices. If you have a need to use these devices, please leave the room and use them outside. First up, we have SEP 2018-11, file number 1606A, 1014 Monroe Turnpike, Massac High School baseball and softball field dugouts. This is a continuation of a public hearing that was opened on December 6th. Will, we have new exhibits?
We have 3 new exhibits. Exhibit number 6, certified mail receipt green cards of the notifications to Aquarian Water Company and the State Department of Public Health. Exhibit number 7, certified mail receipts and green cards from the butter notices. And exhibit number 8, updated ART planning and zoning comments. That's the extent of the added exhibits. As the commission may recall, this has been reconvened from the last session. The only reason that it was adjourned was for the receipt of those official receipts. There was no other outstanding issue that I recall. So I don't really need to summarize the project unless you want me to, but
Does anyone need any additional information on the dugouts? No. If you recall, we went through it, we asked any questions we had, we just needed the signature cards. That's why we kept the hearing open. What's that? You weren't here for that. You were, all three of us weren't here. This is,
just the hearing, so
this is
you're
just the
okay right
hearing
now.
stage. So, does anyone have any additional questions? Will, there's no additional new information.
The only, other than the receipt of the cards, I did write a memo just explaining that we did receive them, Exhibit 6 and 7, as I just listed, and that unless there's any other outstanding issue, you could close the hearing. I don't know if there's any public comment or any other comment from the commissioners.
All right, let's see. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this application? Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition? Any general questions or comments? All right, Will, anything?
Again, since there seems to be no additional public comment, and if there's no questions of the commission, I would suggest you close this hearing, and we can deal with this in deliberations later on in the meeting.
Let's say you close.
Close.
Okay, hearing's closed. 7:06 PM. Next up, item number 7. Planning and Zoning Commission, Monroe, Connecticut, notice of public hearing to be held on December 20th, 2018. In accordance with Connecticut General Statute 8-7D, a public hearing will be held in the Town Hall Council Chambers, 7 Fan Hill Road, Monroe, Connecticut, on Thursday, December 20th, 2018, at 7 p.m. or soon thereafter, concerning the following: RAA 2018-06, file number 1001E, zoning regulation text amendments, limited office retail LOR district, zoning regulations text amendment, amending section 8.2.3F5A of the limited office retail LOR district, seeking to reduce the applicable yard setback from an abutting residential and farming district from an existing 350 feet to 100 feet. Petitioner Cumberland Farms, LLC. Will, what do we have for exhibits?
Exhibit 1, regulation amendment petition. Exhibit 2, AOT comments by the town engineer. Exhibit 3, notice to Aquarian Water Company. Exhibit 4, notice to Commissioner of Public Health. Exhibit 5, regional planning referral notices. Exhibit 6, adjacent municipality referral notices. Exhibit 7, town of Trumbull response to the referral. The town of Trumbull was the only town that was part of that referral. And Exhibit 8, MetroCog draft response to referral. MetroCog was the only regional planning agency that was required to be noticed. We did receive a draft comment from them as well, which is what I just mentioned. And in that it said that if it's 10 days and you don't hear from them, those draft comments are their comments. We did not receive anything, and today is the 10th day. So at end of business at 4:30 today, when we closed, we did not have any further response. So I take their comments to be the draft comments. Exhibit 9, notice of public hearing that was published in addition to voices in the Connecticut Post by the applicant. Exhibit 10, AOT comments by Planning and Zoning. Exhibit 11, affidavit of publication in the Connecticut Post by the applicant. And Exhibit 12, response to referral from Aquarian, a letter from Aquarian responding to the referral. That is all.
Okay, for the applicant.
Good evening, Joe Williams with Shipman and Goodwin, 1 Constitution Plaza in Hartford. I'm a land use attorney who has the privilege of handling applications for Cumberland Farms in a number of towns around the state of Connecticut. In fact, I was here before you, I think it's about 2.5 years ago now, regarding the site that Cumberland Farms built on Main Street here in Monroe, which we're very happy with. And as you can tell, we love Monroe and hoping to develop another opportunity to come back to Monroe. So that's why we're here before you this evening. With me this evening are Chuck Meek, who's the developer for Cumberland Farms with First Hartford Realty. He's available to answer questions. Also, Mark Grocke, he's the civil engineer for this project if it is to go forward with VHB. That's Mark. And he's helping me with some of the visual parts of the presentation, also available to answer questions. And then after I give you an introduction, I'll be pleased to introduce to you Mr. Bill Baird, who is a senior petroleum engineer who will talk with you specifically about some of the criteria that we propose to add to your zoning regulation with respect to the safety and the monitoring of underground storage tank and fuel delivery systems. So Bill is and he'll tell you about his background, but he's a longtime expert in those systems and helped us draft the language that we're proposing to you, and we'll explain to you why Bill believes, in his expert opinion, that what we have proposed to you for standards exceed what any other gas station is required to do under state or federal regulations. So we will turn to Bill in a moment. We are seeking to amend section 8.2.3 F5 of your regulations with respect to automobile service shops and/or gasoline stations. And in that section, as you may know, right now it states in a LOR district, fuel pumps, canopies over fuel pump dispensers, and storage tanks shall not be located within 350 feet from any residential district. And you have the proposed text amendment before you. Our intent in proposing this to you was to provide the commission greater flexibility and discretion to at least look at an application where those fuel facilities may be located somewhat less than 350 feet, but hopefully to build in at least some minimum requirements that an applicant would have to demonstrate to you in order to be given the privilege of having that exception. So we did that on purpose rather than simply propose to the commission a blanket amendment to the regulation, to delete 350 and put in 100 so that anybody could propose it. We didn't want to do that. Whenever we propose or we ask a commission like yours to change the rules somewhat or to modify them, we want to do no harm or as little as possible. So at the very least, instead of making it a blanket amendment where anybody can have a 100-foot separation, we wanted to say the separation requirement is 350 feet. However, if an applicant can come in and demonstrate to the commission that the public health and safety, the environment, and the quality and character of any adjacent residential district is sufficiently safeguarded, then the commission could consider, on a case-by-case basis, granting an exception down to potentially somewhere between 350 and 100 feet. And again, the important thing, at least in terms of our intent and what we're proposing to you, is that it be on a case-by-case basis. It's not a blanket amendment to the rules. It just keeps it at 350, except that the commission can grant an exception if you get an application for a special permit, which would have to be the next step on ours and any other site. And if that applicant demonstrates to you by showing how they will lay out the site, what will be the landscaping, the minimum criteria we baked into this proposed amendment, and any other thing that you can look at under your regulations, if they have satisfied you that 100 feet is enough, basically, then the commission has the flexibility and the discretion to decide we can grant an exception in that situation. So that's the overall intent of what we were looking to do, and as I said, to not change too much if we can help it. So I will return in a moment to the details of the elements that we proposed, and I'd like to discuss some of the comments that the town planner made about them, and we're glad to engage in a discussion about them and glad to talk about amending them if that's the commission's desire. But we at least wanted to make sure consistent, and a lot of it was intending to be consistent with your regulations, that certain things were listed to tell any applicant before you come in here, make sure that you can demonstrate to the commission, that you will be sufficiently protective with regard to landscape screening, lighting, any audible sound, noise from trash removal very early in the morning, and then some very detailed language we put in about how the underground storage tank facilities will be equipped to make sure you're avoiding harm to the environment. So that was the goal there. And the reason we're seeking the change is because Cumberland Farms would like to develop a gas station and convenience store similar to what it did on Main Street, at property located at 255 Monroe Turnpike, Route 111, and 375 Spring Hill Road. Those properties are in the LOR district. I'm sure you're familiar with them. It is a vacant property and an old, I believe, abandoned or at least dilapidated, I think it's fair to say, blighted house at the intersection of Monroe Turnpike and Spring Hill Road. Across the street from this site, this is the existing conditions here.
Mr. Williams, I
Yeah.
don't want to cut you off, but I
Sure.
want to caution you. This is a text amendment
It is.
application, it's not a site plan application.
That's correct.
So it doesn't relate strictly to that piece of property. It relates to any piece of property in the LOR zone. So let's try to broaden our discussion.
I will. And that's absolutely correct, Mr. Chairman. We just like to be transparent, open and upfront with the commission. You know, sometimes if you're not honest about why you're seeking an amendment, people wonder, well, what are you trying to do with this? So that was meant for context, just to tell you the site we're focused on. We're not going to try to present to you a site plan or extensive detail about this property. The point is well taken. And you're right, it's a text amendment that could apply to any property in the LOR district if you can demonstrate the stuff we're talking about. So that's true. Okay. And if we were to come forward with that application, we would show you that we believe we can develop that site in a manner that's compliant with all of your regulations except for the separation. That's why we're asking for an exception to be allowed for that property. Okay. Now, turning back to the text amendment, our goal anyway and our intent was to be sensitive to the goals of your LOR district, which we know is a transition zone. And it's highly important, the commission stated, to maintain the character and the quality of the adjacent residential zones. So we're trying to be sensitive to that and aware of that. As I said, the proposal, we believe, would give the commission greater discretion than you have now and empower you to look at proposals that you might not be able to look at today because of the 350-foot buffer requirement, like ours. And we believe the proposal does no harm in two ways. First, it merely permits an applicant to come in with an application to build a gas station convenience store with less than a 350-foot buffer, so long as the commission finds that adequate safeguards are in place. But this text amendment in and of itself does not permit any development. It's, like I said, it doesn't change the regulation, it just allows you to give an exception in limited circumstances. So the 350 is there unless, it doesn't take away the 350 entirely. An applicant, of course, would still be required to come in and apply for location approval to sell gasoline and for a special permit, and an applicant would need to demonstrate that it meets all of your normal special permit criteria, as well as any new criteria that you might adopt with this regulation amendment. And I would just note, in case you're wondering, is this sort of thing unheard of, or what kind of separation do people use in other places? Cumberland Farms has developed a number of facilities, just like we've already built in Monroe, just like we would like to build again in Monroe, in other towns that have similar proximity to residential properties, and they're all operating successfully without any kinds of difficulties with our residential neighbors. I think we have just a couple of examples that I would show you, so you can see the type of thing that, with this type of exception in the regulation, Mr. Chairman. Why don't we just show the existing Monroe site? That's probably the most relevant. That's the site plan of the existing Monroe site. That has a little greater separation. I think it's 160 feet between the gas facilities and a residential property, but within the range of what we're talking about under this proposed text amendment. Probably familiar with that site on Main Street at Hattertown Road next to the Monroe Muffler.
And that's a B2 zone.
I think so, yeah, B2, right?
Yes.
Yep. And then maybe just one more, Bristol. Is that Bristol?
This is really quick. My name is Mark Rocky,
Yeah.
project manager with VHB, responsible for a number of these example site plans. And this other site plan here, this was a recent store recently constructed in Woolkit, Connecticut.
Okay.
Again, we were able to accommodate an existing vegetative buffer, add a number of screening trees to the north here, in our tank separation, which privy to the zoning text amendment that we're attempting to achieve, this is approximately a 50-foot distance to a residential zone here with an ample vegetated buffer.
Which are immediately behind the site,
Correct.
the residences. Okay, thank you. just so you know that it's not without precedent that this type of thing can be done successfully. I also wanted to point out to you, as I think we told you in our submittal letter, that the proposed amendment we believe is consistent with several goals of your plan of conservation and development. Those include statements in Chapter 7, which is economic development, Chapter 13, future land use plan, and with regard to in the appendix, you have a public opinion survey. Specifically, your economic development goals, as I'm sure you know, in the POCD state a goal to increase the economic base and the tax base. It makes particular reference to developing vacant parcels, and gives a particular focus to economic development along Route 111, which is, of course, considered a gateway into Monroe, and that's an area where the POCD looks to focus development. Also noted in the public opinion survey, as I'm sure you're aware, that a majority of residents in Monroe stated that they wanted to see more retail and commercial development in Monroe, and they want to ensure that development is consistent with the New England character of the town. That's something else that Cumberland Farms can provide if this amendment is granted, and which we did on our Main Street site. So that's my summary. That's my initial pitch as to what we're looking to do and why we believe it's consistent with your plan of conservation and development, and does as little change to the regulations as we believe is reasonable under the circumstances. I'll come back to a couple of the particular components that we propose in the regulation and discuss Mr. Agresta's memo in a few moments, but I want to get Bill Baird up here as soon as possible. Bill's going to talk about the last section of the proposed amendments to the regulation. That's part small letter 5, Roman numeral 5, regarding UST facilities meeting state and federal requirements and being equipped with all these things that Bill recommended they be equipped with to exceed the federal and state requirements. So that's our goal, that if the commission is looking at a particular application and is willing to consider reducing that separation, that this gives the ability to say, if we're going to, you need to give something to get something. And if you're going to get that reduction, you, applicant, need to even exceed the safety requirements under federal and state law and do the types of things that we are proposing. Bill.
I have some handouts that I would like to pass out.
Just give me a moment.
To belong to you, so
Do you need one?
I don't need one. Mr. Chairman, I have a panel board and a stand, but you requested that I stand by the microphone.
Do you have an electronic version of that
I
drawing?
do not, sir.
Well, yeah,
We
you have
have it
to,
on this print, right?
yeah, you have to be by the microphones for the recording to pick up your
Okay,
voice.
okay.
I'm going to add that as Exhibit 13.
And this is who I am. My name is William Baird. I live at 111 Summer Street in Situate, Massachusetts. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I've been involved with underground storage tanks since 1969. I have been considered an expert, and I have done work for the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, the Air Force, and the EPA on leaking underground storage tanks. So what I did was I looked at the state and federal regulations, and I took what I know about underground tanks, and I made a generic presentation. And I looked at your regulations
and basically have suggestions as to how you could improve your regulations for underground storage tanks. So if you look at 5 on the facilities, A is enhanced vapor recovery equipment that meets the California Air Resources Board, the national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants, and maximum achievable control technologies. This regulation is not in the state and federal regs. With this regulation, the vents from gasoline will have pressure vacuum valves, which will limit the emissions to 0.17 cubic feet per hour. In layman's terms, that's 294 cubic inches, and a basketball equals 456 cubic inches. So by adopting this regulation, you are severely restricting the venting of gasoline through the vent pipes at a gasoline facility. The double-wall tanks, and I also addressed steel tanks because I wanted to be generic with this. They shall be double-wall with interstice monitoring. Steel tanks do not have the facility that I'm proposing for fiberglass tanks. The current regulations require a double wall, but it allows a dry interstice. The issue with a dry interstice is that the interstice can be punctured above the groundwater, and you don't know it and nobody else knows it. It has to be tested in 5 years. The proposal would be that the interstice be filled with a liquid, which right now is calcium chloride and water, calcium chloride to keep it from freezing. But the beauty of that is that if the interstice fails on the outside of the tank, an alarm goes off because the interstice is continuously monitored by a system that is built by Veeder-Root Corporation. If the inside, the primary containment fails, the calcium chloride liquid leaks into the tank and 2 alarms go off. Registering the height of the liquid in the containment, if you will, and also the alarm within the tank that would sense a liquid. The inventory alarms are equipped to sense a liquid penetrating the gasoline or the diesel fuel. So my recommendation would be that you require a liquid interstice continuously monitored as a really, in my opinion, a tremendous improvement in underground storage. Think of it this way. In the building of the tank or later in the tank, if the backfill is not properly put in, the outside of the tank can fracture in a double wall tank with a dry interstice. If the primary tank then fails and the tank is full, the gasoline can leak into the environment, but the fact that the secondary containment is not monitored doesn't tell you that. And then, yes, at the initial installation of the tank, the secondary has to be tested. But then it doesn't, by regulation, have to be tested for another 5 years. Something can go wrong in that 5 years, or after the 5-year test in the next 5 years, and nobody knows about it. However, with the liquid interstice, an alarm goes off immediately, actually 2. If it's the outside, 1 alarm goes off. If it's the primary tank, 2 alarms go off. The sump pumps should be continuously monitored. The state and federal regulations require sumps underneath the dispensers and also for containment where the pumps are located at the top of the tank. However, there's no requirement that the sumps be continuously monitored. They just need to be tested in Massachusetts every 3 years. The state regulation here is 5 years. So my suggestion is that you make sure that the sumps are continuously monitored for leaks. That is also made by Veeder-Root, but also a bunch of other companies. The reason I say Veeder-Root, it's a Connecticut company. The other requirement is that you want double wall fiberglass piping as opposed to flexible double wall piping. In my opinion, a rigid double wall pipe, fiberglass pipe, draining to the containment sumps is much better because it is a 2-inch pipe inside of a 3-inch pipe. So there's a lot of space between the primary pipe containing the fuel and the secondary containment that allows a leak to immediately go to a containment sump. And I have witnessed in New York State double wall flexible piping that did not immediately identify leaking pipe. It was somehow crushed. You do need to have leak detectors, but there are 2 kinds of leak detectors. One is a mechanical leak detector that when the pumps are shut down, the mechanical leak detector will sense a loss of pressure and close to a point that when someone is delivering fuel to their car, it only comes out at a fraction of a gallon a minute. So they will run in and say, hey, there's something wrong with your pumps. There are pressurized line leak detectors that will detect a leak in the primary piping instantaneously and shut off the pumps and prevent any further discharge. Those are pressurized line leak detectors. They are also manufactured by Veeder-Root Corporation, although there are other companies that also do that. And I went into the fact that containment sumps do not have to be continuously monitored. And let me just point out, these are your containment sumps. That's the pump in the sump. This is the primary piping that drains into the containment sump. There's a monitor at the bottom of the containment sump. So any liquid, water, or gasoline will sound an alarm. These alarms are not required by state and federal regulations. This is the liquid sensor. See this bubble? That is so that the sensor, which is very accurate, these tanks flex a little bit when product is put in them or when product is removed. And so this containment area has enough liquid in it so that if when the tank is empty and gets filled, the liquid comes back up into the sensor. But it's calculated such that if a leak starts, the level goes down to the bottom, the sensor goes off. Okay, I talked about steel piping, and single-wall steel piping is allowed with corrosion protection, but you can put secondary containment, double wall. You could put fiberglass around steel piping, properly designed, such that you have secondary containment and steel piping is not exposed to the soil environment. The tank filling, which is here, the fill pipe goes down to near the bottom of the tank. But what's in this area, both for vapor recovery and for filling, is very important. You can have double wall sumps now that can be either vacuum, continuous vacuum, or can be pressure vacuum tested every 5 years, instead of a single wall sump, which can corrode. And when product is being delivered to a site, there can be some drippage from the hose when the hose is disconnected to the tank. A double wall sump makes sure, spill containment sump, make sure that there's no release to the environment. If it's a single wall sump, it can corrode, and there could be a release between the time that it's tested and the next time that it's tested. Also, a lot of requirements for vapor recovery do not require containment sumps. And in my opinion, there's always condensate. The condensate can get into the ground if there's not, and I recommend secondary containment on basically everything. But also, at the top here, where the hose is connected for both vapor recovery and filling, the state of California has enhanced vapor recovery fittings, which are not required by the state and federal government. But these fittings are basically guaranteed not to emit vapors when the tank is in business and there's not a filling occurring. However, even with the filling, the tightness of those fittings has been approved by the California Air Resources Board. That is not required by state and federal regulations. I already mentioned the venting of the piping. And the other thing is that regulations allow all kinds of monitoring of the inventory, including still sticking the tank and recording what's delivered through the pumps every day, plus what's left in the tank. There are tank inventory controls that continuously monitor the tank and essentially do a leak test every minute that the tank is in operation. One last thing is that with this state-of-the-art equipment, companies can contract with third parties to continuously monitor the equipment in their stations, if you will, such that there's no reliance on the people that are operating the gas delivery and the diesel delivery. Although those people have to be trained by regulation. They are called C operators. Federal and state requirements are that every facility that delivers gasoline or diesel fuel to the public has to have an A operator, a B operator, and a C operator. The A operator is responsible for generally for the whole corporation, meeting state and federal requirements. The B operator specifically knows those facilities that are storing gasoline or diesel fuel. And the C operator, the B operator trains the C operator. The C operator is trained in emergency response. But that's a requirement that is in business right now. But I would just like to offer the fact that there is continuously monitoring whenever a facility is in operation, that there is someone trained to respond to emergencies. So on the next page, we're talking about the dispensers, and there are all the requirements are that the dispensers that will be number 4 of the drawings handout. You will see in the center a containment sump under the dispensers, and then you see something that's called a shear valve. Those are required. Shear valves are required. They have a weak section in them so that if a dispenser is displaced, that valve closes, or if there's a fire, there's a fusible link that would essentially melt and allow the valve to close. However, there are double poppet shear valves, or crash valves as they're called. And the double poppet means that when the dispenser is displaced, the valve shears. With the double poppet, all the gasoline or diesel fuel that's in the dispenser stays in the dispenser, and the first poppet, the primary poppet against the pump, shuts off the flow also. So single poppet shear valves are required, but double poppet shear valves are not required. I did mention the tank filling with the enhanced vapor recovery, and I mentioned the tank venting and the tank inventory control. So that's my recommendation to you for your requirements for underground storage in the town. Any questions?
How many of these 9 itemized safeguards exist at the Main Street Cumberland Farms facility?
To the best of my knowledge, this is what Cumberland Farms does everywhere, but I was not part of that particular facility. But to me, it looks like a modern Cumberland Farms storage system. I know that this has been going on for 2 or 3 years now with Cumberland Farms, everything I proposed tonight.
Thank you.
So I don't know how, I could go check if you would like me to come back sometime and report to you in the future.
That's quite all right.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple questions, if I may.
You want to ask right now? So I-
Well, he's for him, yeah.
Sure. Commissioner Ambrosi has a question also.
Isn't it, most leakage on most sites, most of, my understanding is mostly due to piping, right? A lot of this.
That's true.
Right. So the piping is, will be a main concern. Usually, a lot of times it's, you know, from what I understand, that the tanks don't really leak, it's mostly the piping that's leaking.
Well, the
When
double
they dig
wall,
them up, they find it, the piping is what's been leaking for years.
Right, I do know of double wall underground storage tanks with dry interstices with a sensor at the bottom of the tank that have leaked. And
With steel? With
double wall fiberglass,
Double wall fiberglass.
yes. I know of one in particular on Cape Cod. But you're right that for the most part, it's the piping. The piping that I am recommending is rigid fiberglass piping. It cannot, it's good for all levels of alcohol, and it does not corrode, and it can't be dissolved because it's basically formed with a catalyst that makes it irreversible.
Does it have more flex than steel anyway, right? Fiberglass have more flex for movement?
That's true, yes. But I certainly don't recommend steel for gasoline and diesel fuel. I do for
No,
chemicals.
I know there's been a lot of problems with steel piping, and
Yes.
it's mostly where the connections are, where they connect and everything like that.
Well, I'm smiling because in my history, when we used to dig up tanks, we would find that the piping was galvanized, and you'd dig it up, and the galvanizing and the piping, particularly the vent piping, would be all corroded and everything like they used to.
Right.
But that was to steel tanks.
Right.
And that galvanized pipe provided cathodic protection to the steel tanks.
Okay, that's the only question I
All right, Will?
have. Well,
I'm just trying to clarify your recommendation. So if you were designing a system for a client, would you be recommending that they do all these things?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we design for companies other than Cumberland Farms, and in all of our designs, what I've put here is part of the design,
Right.
yes.
So to take that a little further, so you would recommend them wherever they are, whether it be in this town, another town,
Yes,
whether they be in this location or that location?
that's correct.
And the second question is there a reason why they aren't required by state and federal?
Well, the federal government is addressing all the states in the United States, and I know in some particular states that these requirements are not. They're not even thought of, if you will. That's not true for the Northeast. The Northeast, Massachusetts, much of what I've said here is required in Massachusetts, but not all of it. Everything you see here is required in California. And so, being in the business and who I am, this is what I do. And I want to be sure that we have the safest, anything that I'm responsible for is the safest design that there is today. Protective of the groundwater, the ground, the soil, and the air with these pressure vacuum vents and the enhanced vapor recovery. There won't be any odors beyond the property line of any facility that has this equipment. And I'm an environmental engineer, and so this is what I do.
Right, so obviously if there's some type of leak in the tank, which is in subsurface, it's going to get primarily in the soil and the groundwater, correct?
I'm sorry?
If there's a leak, it's obviously in the ground. These are subsurface tanks, correct? So the primary impact, I mean, there's several impacts, but the primary impact would be potential to the soil and the groundwater.
That's why I recommend the interstice be filled with calcium chloride solution. That product is heavier than both gasoline and diesel fuel. And so if there's a leak, particularly in the primary tank, it the gasoline or the diesel fuel cannot leak out. But you have the two sensors.
Right.
You have the inventory sensor, and you also have the sensor on the interstice.
And obviously, those measures are help to minimize and get to the issue fast, correct? If you have a leak, you can deal with it quickly by having these
that's right.
detection measures.
That's right.
Is there any understanding with the gas stations when there is leaks and the plumes and how far they can travel?
That depends strictly on the type of soil. If you have hard pan, it doesn't go very far. If you have Cape Cod sands, in a year can travel quite far.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Baird.
Thank you. The attorney has asked me to say that I believe this is very protective within 100 feet of the station. I believe it's more protective than just within 100 feet of the station, truly. Because this is the best I have seen in my whole history of dealing with underground storage tanks. And it, in fact, is a response by the state of California and by the tank manufacturers and the oil companies to prevent releases to the environment. Let's face it, you don't start at, if you have gasoline in your groundwater, you don't start at $100,000. You start at $250,000 to $500,000. It's very expensive not to do the right thing right up front. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Just a few closing points, Mr. Chairman, about the detail that we proposed in the regulation. I'm not going to read it to you, but I'll just talk about it by category. And I told you what our overall intent was, and our additional intent in proposing these specific elements was to provide some minimum requirements of what somebody would need to show to the commission, the types of things they would need to show the commission in order for you to decide in your discretion whether you were willing to give any reduction in the separation requirement from between 350 and 100 feet. They're not meant in any way to take away from anything that's already in your regulations. Everything's there. You can look at all those things too on a special permit. Some of them were intentionally consistent and stating a very similar requirement to what you have now so that they were sort of all lined up in one place for somebody to see before they would come in. In a couple of places we did intend to make it more protective so that the commission can look at whether somebody making this type of application is showing you that the separation that they are proposing is sufficiently protective of the environment and of the adjacent residential districts. So with regard to the landscape screening, we use very similar language to what is in your regulation intentionally. We did intend anyway to make it somewhat more mandatory than what your regulations state, because our reading of 6.2.4 C2 is that a landscape buffer may consist of a combination of screening and walls or berms and that sort of thing. So we brought in all of those elements. Our intent was to make it more of a shall requirement, a mandatory requirement, than a may requirement. So that's what we were going for there, and if the commission was otherwise inclined to consider this type of text amendment, if you want to add something to it, if you want to tweak it to make it even more mandatory, we're certainly open to having that discussion with you. So that was number one. Number two, the lighting. Number three, the audible advertising and music. I don't disagree with Mr. Agresta's point that you have good regulations on that. Like I said, our intent was to call out some specific things that are minimum requirements. I don't argue that those go beyond what you have already, and they certainly don't take away from what you have already. So no debate there. On the refuse removal, our goal is this. Some comments have been made on other applications of ours. Some comments were made, I know, by commissioners when our team was here for the informal meeting with you about noise from gasoline stations. And our experience on told in complete candor, the noisiest thing that happens at a Cumberland Farm Station is the trash pickup. And I've seen it even here at the Monroe site. And that's because a lot of times the trash vendor comes and they use their truck, they pick up the large metal dumpster container, and they bang, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure why they're doing it, but they bang it in some way that happens, and it can be loud. And so we've had many commissions when we come in on a site plan or special permit who have specifically asked us, we know the trash guys usually come at 5 a.m. or something, and that can be common in places, but it can also be unpleasant if you live right near a commercial property. Maybe they didn't have a requirement otherwise on their trash, and the trash comes at 5 a.m., and that's pretty loud. So that was our goal there, is to call that one out in particular, because no, it doesn't, we didn't propose it in here, although I'm open to it. We didn't propose in the application that it applied to other deliveries. That was just because those ones aren't really noisy. You know, a guy gets out of the truck and walks in. The commission can look at all those things on a special permit application anyway. We always have those discussions. We probably had it with you on the last one, I don't remember for sure. But sometimes there are timing requirements that commissions want to make sure that you're not delivering the food, or you're not delivering gas during peak hours, or you're not delivering it between midnight and 5 a.m. because of residences nearby, or some commissions want us to do it then so that you're not there in the peak hour. All those things can be talked about, you know, in an actual site development application. This one I thought was appropriate to actually say in the regulation, you're not going to have early trash pickup because it's a subject of noise potentially from a gas station. But otherwise, and the engineers who are here can talk more about it if you'd like. Generally, we don't have a lot of noise coming out of our stations. We don't hear that. We've showed you a couple of examples. We have many others where they've been built, you know, in similar proximity to residential properties. You already have a requirement, as Mr. Gresta pointed out, banning, you know, the use of loudspeakers or music or audio advertising at the pumps. That's the only other thing that somebody might talk about if they're turned on and they're too loud. So we were just trying to address another thing that could potentially cause noise. And it's true, what Mr. Agresta said in his memo is true, that other commercial or retail facilities don't have that requirement, but we were trying to offer something additional, that if the separation is reduced for this kind of facility, then the commission has a specific requirement that the trash will not come very early and wake people up. What else? That was the trash. Oh, and then the last thing, I hope you found from Bill Baird that we did intentionally propose detailed language and requirements that do go beyond what federal and state requirements require here in Connecticut. No other applicant who comes before you has to do all of those things. You know, he explained to you the multiple mandatory measures that he has in the regulation, the state-of-the-art equipment, the fail-safes, containment sumps, monitoring alarms, and a bunch of other things that are designed to protect the environment from gas vapors and from spills or leaks. That would require somebody to meet the California standards, which the state of Connecticut does not require, the federal government does not require. So unless they voluntarily do those things like Cumberland Farms does, nobody else has to do those things. But if they were to come to you under this regulation, if they were to come to you and say, we want to put such a station in an LOR district, and we want it to be 200 feet from a residential district instead of 350, now they have to do those things. And so you get a more, we believe, a more protective system on the whole for the environment and for air quality. So that was the goal there. Just wanted to make those points and hopefully address the comments that you have before you. If there's no other questions for us, that's our presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. You briefly mentioned it, but I want to go on record for this application to just discuss a little bit about how the LOR zone came about, what its origin was, and where we are today with our regulations concerning that zone. This was originally a limited office, strictly an LO zone. And it was meant to be a transitional zone between the business and the residential zones, which are in very close proximity to these particular properties in this zone. It's a very shallow corridor backed up by residential properties on both sides of Monroe Turnpike. We were approached several years ago by some of the property owners in the LO zone who were talking to us about the difficulties they were having developing their lots because what we allowed in the LO zone was very limited. And intentionally, it was very limited. So through some discussions with those property owners and discussion with the commission, it was decided that we would add a low-impact retail component to that zone, which was basically somewhat comparable to our B1 uses. So that's when it became the LOR zone. I think that was in 2016. The intent was to allow some low-impact retail so that some of these lots could be developed. That's when the Goodwill store went in. Might have been when the school went in. So we got some additional development in the zone, but it was, again, it was low impact, very, very low impact on the residential properties. Subsequent to that, we had an application come in where the applicant wanted to put in a gas station, which is not allowed in the LOR zone or in our B1 zone. We consider the gas stations to be a more intense use, and we didn't really feel it was appropriate for this zone. But through some discussions and meetings with the applicant, discussions with the commission, input from some of the surrounding residential property owners, the commission at that time decided to add a gas station component to the LOR, but with a very strict 350-foot setback, because the intent of this zone was not to be a heavily commercialized zone. It was to be a transitional zone between business and the residents. So that's where the 350-foot setback came up. That wasn't just a number that we picked out of the air. A lot of time and discussion went into that, taking into account the residential property owners that live in close proximity to these LOR parcels.
Sure.
So your application is basically asking to change the regulation so that we, at our discretion, can reduce that 350-foot setback. But some of the items that you stated that you just reviewed, we already require a 50-foot landscape buffer. That's more than any of our other zones. We require not a 50-foot setback, but a 50-foot landscape buffer between gas stations and residentially zoned properties. So we already have that. We already have lighting standards where we don't allow light to pass the property line. We don't allow uplights. Everything has to be dark sky compliant. So we're pretty strict in our lighting regulations already. We don't allow outside audible in any use, not just gas stations. We don't allow outside audible. We don't allow it at restaurants. We don't allow it anywhere. The refuse removal, I understand that could be a plus if it were to be added to a use in this zone, but if this was strictly related to a gas station use in this zone, and somebody goes to the post office next door at 5 o'clock in the morning and empties the garbage, it's making just as much noise. So I understand the intent, I appreciate the effort, but it's not going to have a major impact or protective quality to the neighborhood.
Well, you're just not getting it from this site, that's all. You're not
I
adding
understand.
it. You're not adding it.
So putting those issues aside, how are we protecting our residential property owners under this proposed text amendment?
Well, I think the landscaping language, it might be subtle, but I think it's it's more mandatory in saying not only do you have vegetative screening, maybe 2 rows of pine trees, you have to have that in addition to some berms and some walls and some things. It comes down to a site-based, case-by-case review by the commission, but the intent was to be a little bit more. And maybe it could be tweaked to even be more so, but that was the goal there, and I think it does do that in saying it's not a may, it's a shall, you have to do this and this. So that's number one. Maybe not a big change, I acknowledge that. And then the second one is our more protective and safer gas delivery system.
So does that statement mean that the gas station that goes in that follows EPA and DEEP regulations is not safe?
I'm not going to try to give an opinion on that as a general statement, Mr. Chairman. No,
Could your expert then?
I suppose he could probably answer that if you want him to answer it.
Well, I'm just, I understand
It's
and
not
I
our-
appreciate all these.
It's not our position, let me say that, it's not our position that those things are unsafe. But any time you have this kind of facility, there's some degree of risk that we all accept in using them and allowing them to be built. And what we're proposing to you is, if the separation is reduced, there are additional things that can be done that a normal applicant doesn't have to do, that can eliminate a lot more of that risk and have fail-safes in place to deal with it quicker and to avoid vapors and that sort of thing.
Well, I
So
want to
no,
know
we're
if
not
I'm being
contending that there is.
negligent in my duties to the people who elected me to this office by approving other gas stations that don't follow these guidelines. So
I'm
I
not
would
saying they're
like-
unsafe.
I would like to know if EPA and DEEP regulations are not safe or suitable for gas stations.
We're not saying that. We're just saying ours is better than what they require.
Okay,
And this regulation would deliver better than what they require.
okay, thank you. Start down at the end.
You talk a lot about the tanks, along with the noise and stuff. You don't talk about the traffic though, foot traffic and people that come with, your facility can't play music, but the cars sitting there pumping their gas can play music. The people, getting slushies and hanging out, and, something that this town kind of needs and looks for a lot is a place for the younger people to hang out. And places like this, like Cumberland Farms over on 25, have become that, where, you will get people hanging out there, which is great, except for when it's, within 100 feet of the neighbor. That can be noise stuff that you don't necessarily discuss or think about in here. You kind of left out the people element, I feel like, a little bit.
Well, that's a good point. And you're right, we didn't cover that. And it's a generic amendment, so what Cumberland Farms does doesn't necessarily answer the entire question. They do have a policy of, have all of their people who are in the stores work for the company, they're not franchised, they have their standards, they don't, they encourage kids to move on and not hang out. But some stores do, and some Cumberland Farms stores do propose outdoor seating.
Yeah, you have some on 25.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're right, I didn't think about that. And that's something, of course, the commission can look at on the special permit application, and you could say, if we're gonna allow you to be less than 350 feet, you're not having outdoor seating. So you can do that. But it could also be in this regulation. It's a fair point, and it doesn't mean it shouldn't be. I didn't think of that. You're right, it's a good point. And if the commission otherwise was going in favor of the amendment, but you wanted to add a requirement that there not be congregation space or something, and that's one of the requirements, we would agree to that. But thank you for the point.
I have no questions.
Was there any consideration on the effect of the 100 versus the 350-foot setback in coming to the number? I know that it's probably specific to the property going to the 100, but what effect the reduction of the 250 feet has for potential effects on residents?
We did think about that, and it's my understanding, although this is secondhand information, that a prior station was built, had the 350 feet, maybe didn't have extensive buffering and screening. Now, I could be corrected on that, I'm not 100% certain, but I did hear that as an anecdotal example, and our thought was, I'm not sure exactly what led to the 350 feet. I don't dispute that you gave it careful consideration and you thought about it, but can you have adequate separation, screening, buffering with less than 350 feet, we think yes. So that's why we tried to propose some things that would make sure you get that and that you have a, a protective gas delivery system to make sure that you're taking away a risk of allowing that stuff to be closer to the residential districts. So yes, we did think about that. That was the intent of trying to build in these standards to say to the commission, we're not just going to ask you to cross out 350 and put in 100, but rather that you can give yourself the discretion to reduce it on a site-by-site basis if you find that these things have been proven. But, we think you can do just as good of an amount of protection and screening and buffering that avoids the impacts to residential properties. That's the intent of the LOR district at 100 feet as you can at 350.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions. Cumberland's Farms, yeah, we're talking about the safety of the tanks and everything like that. On your pumps, do you have holding clips on your pumps?
Holding clips?
Yeah.
You mean like a pop-it thing that's so that if it pulls off, they can't leak?
No.
Then I don't know what you mean, I'm sorry.
Put the holding clip on. I mean, he would probably know.
Oh, to hold it into the tank?
No, to hold it on. and
Oh, to hold it on, yeah, I think they do.
They do.
Can you hear him all right if he stays there?
There,
Come on.
there are, it is allowed. It has, most states have changed their regulations in towns and cities to have the clips, but there are some towns that do not allow them.
I thought.
And you end up, you have to hold, you have to hold the nozzle open the whole time. That's an excellent point.
I don't know about that.
You have them at the gas station I go to.
No, I understand. But I don't know.
Most of them do.
No, most of them do.
I just filled up
We
at the
don't have a
Cumberland.
zoning requirement.
I just filled up tonight at the Cumberland
I thought the
Farms.
fire marshal was the one that handled that.
They might, but again, I don't know all the fire marshal's requirements, but I.
Because I was under the
zoning
understanding that in our town,
The buck stop on Main Street has one.
no, I got that, but I was under the understanding, that we enforced about, I thought I was under the understanding in our town that if it was a self-serve station, that there was no holding clips.
I don't know.
I can
I'm
tell
saying
you,
because,
I did a self-serve tonight, and there were
no,
holding
and I
clips.
have that, and a lot of times the problem happens with the holding clips when somebody walks away from the pump.
Right, I mean, they're supposed to stay at the
Yeah, but that's
dispensers,
not
even
right.
if they have the holding clips. You're absolutely right.
But a lot of spillage has to do because people walk away from the pump, or the pump don't shut off because it's holding clips.
That's right.
The only reason why bringing that up is because I know there was an incident at the Cumberland Farms where somebody walked away and the girl started screaming at him. But if they didn't have the holding clips on there, he wouldn't be walking away from it in the first place.
You're right. You
And
could
they banned him
change.
from going to their gas
You could
station.
have your fire chief
No,
require
but I-
that the holding clips be removed on all
And the only
the
reason,
service stations.
well, the only reason why I say that is because they did own a station in our town, and I did know at one time that we required on self-serve, there would be no holding clips.
That's right.
And I don't know if that's enforced anymore or not, but at one time, I know that was the case, but
You're right.
I know a lot of stations have them, and,
Well, the requirement has been changed. I can't speak for Connecticut, but I do know in Massachusetts, you weren't allowed to have holding clips a year ago. Now you're allowed to have holding clips. However, there are some cities and towns in eastern Massachusetts where the fire chief has said no holding clips.
and I believe it all comes back to the fire chief, but I was just wondering what your thoughts on that were.
Well, I use the holding clips when they're there, but I never walk away from my car.
Right.
However, it doesn't make any difference to me unless it's a windy, rainy, snowy day, and then I do enjoy the holding clip so that I don't have to.
Right, no, I
hold.
have that. What I'm saying is,
Right,
all right, I just had to ask that question, that's all.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't force me to go to another station if I
No,
have
no,
to
no,
hold.
no, I have that, and there's certain people that will stick the gas thing,
Cap.
cap on it,
Right.
right?
Oh, yes, yeah. There's one thing that I didn't emphasize, and that is in the enhanced vapor recovery, the pressure vacuum vents on the vents from the tanks, that small amount of cubic feet per hour under current regulations, the only requirement is essentially an upflow vent, and that's basically to keep water from coming into the tank. The idea of having that pressure vacuum vent that's required in Massachusetts and in California really restricts the amount of gasoline that can be released when the tanker truck is there. There's not much breathing otherwise, but when the tanker truck is there and loading, even though there's vapor return, there is a release of vapors, but with this pressure vacuum vent, severely restricts the amount of gasoline. So that, in fact, if you're just a few feet away from those vents, you're not going to smell gasoline.
Thank you.
Anything else? Paul?
No question.
Anything else for us, Mr. Chairman?
Staff have anything before I open it to the public?
I just want to comment a little about the landscape buffer requirements. Although the word says may with regards to the components, the ultimate decision is the commission's in regards to what is adequate buffer for that particular site.
Sure.
So I really don't see it much different than the word shall in that, and may in that instance, other than it would force them to have multiple components, as opposed to what might be the best solution, which might only be one component.
Okay.
Anything else, Walt?
No.
All right, Mr. Williams, let's, if you're done with your presentation, let's see if we have any public comment.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in favor of this application? Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition? One at a time, please. Name and address for the record.
My name is Roger Sedgren. I live at 300 Teller Road in Monroe. It's within very close proximity to this, and I've been a resident here for 42 years. And I believe that a good sum of money was spent on a master plan as to what went where and what your regulations were. I myself personally was quarter of an inch off on a set of stairs to a porch, and it was brought to my attention that it had to be fixed to get a permit to use it. I think these people are trying to put 25 pounds into a 5-pound bag, believing that if you double bag it, it'll work. They're not local residents. You had 5 corners that years ago we responded, and I, as an EMT, responded to many serious accidents in that area. They're now gone from many serious accidents, as of today, to many minor. Fender benders, people running lights. Cross Hill was eliminated because you had a safety problem there. Adding to that with this gas station, I think you've got not a need for any more gas stations. You've got 3 between Monroe's and Trumbull's Town Line and Elm Street. You've had one of the people that had their service station on just beyond Cross Hill. They did not pump gas, so there wasn't a need for gas, evidently. The ones that are there now, I think Cumberland, because of their cheaper prices and their way of operation, they're going to put the other 2 out of business. One of those now, the Sunoco station, is without mechanics because they're trying to survive now, I guess, just on gas. There was a master plan set up by the town of Monroe. I think it should be adhered to. I mean, if it was a variance of 10 feet, 25 feet even, but 150 feet is trying to put a skyscraper on a traffic island in the middle of the road. You've got an industrial plan whether it covers them under there or not, but they're completely out of zone for that as a gas station. There's no zoning now that they're infringing on or anything else. You're jumping from residential and the other zones to this. It's not a local business. They pay their taxes, but maybe they'll pay their taxes and the other two will have to eat and leave the business. They're in a zone where they're allowed. Nothing was brought up tonight as to where these trucks were gonna be driving. Are they going in Spring Hill and in a residential area to deliver? Are they coming down Purdy Hill, which is,
So this is not about a specific lot, it's about a change to the zoning regulations for the entire zone.
These zones, or these roads in Purdy Hill, across the street, Goodwill, widened their road, our town road, to get their accommodations in. I live on Teller Road. Since they've been in there, the traffic is hugely done, but they'll tell you the survey was done on 111. This is not, 111 is not a residential corner. I don't know exactly how to put it legally, but I think tonight many more people would oppose this if we had a local paper that people are aware that this was coming up tonight. There's no on your iPad or something like that, yes, but if you don't catch it on your iPad, which we did, people we talked to said, oh, they knew nothing about it.
Well, the local paper now is Voices.
The local papers, pardon me?
Voices is the name of the weekly local paper.
We don't get it.
Call
Never
them.
had an offer for it. I'm sorry.
Call them up. It's
Okay,
Voices, Voices.
okay. I don't see that it serves any purpose in this town to have another gas station. Maybe a little bit better price, comparing theirs to the other stations. But I know as a fact that other stations, like ones on Route 25, are really hurting because of their prices. Good for their prices, I'm glad of it. These tanks, the buildings are going to be within 150 feet out of where they belong. What about the tanks? Are they on the variance for that also? As far as the convenience store part of it, you got one across the street in Walgreens. Service. I see no service that is going to be in this town other than price and their pocketbooks. I guess because of the regulations of what are tonight, I can't say more. But I strongly oppose it, and I know traffic-wise on Teller Road is going to be that much more because they can take a shortcut to come in. And the road is narrow as it is. But then they say, well, all right, we'll put a wider place. Is this going to be, if they're going to widen this to get into their gas station? And if they are, it's on the town road, it's got to be widened. I just strongly disapprove of this whole thing. I don't think it's a need for it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen, and Mr. Porter. It's been a long time. How are you? Thank you for hearing me tonight.
Just your name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going there. Robert Zump in Monroe, and I will ask the committee if they could actually put the picture back up on the board of what we were looking at on Spring Hill Road.
I don't know if I have that.
Okay. If you allow me to just regress just a little bit, I'll try not to take up too much of your time, but I live on Spring Hill Road on the left, and we kind of just went through this a little while ago, and Mr. Porter touched on quite a bit of it when he was talking. I live behind 205 Monroe Turnpike, where they just decided to put in a so-called gas station. You missed one gas station, sir. He didn't know about that one. I'll get to that in a minute, but with a bunch of other chain stores and a restaurant. I don't understand why you need that many gas stations. You have a Shell gas station next to Connex. You would have the gas station behind my house. You would have a gas station at the end of my road on Spring Hill Road. You have 2 more gas stations of Mobile and Sunoco down the street. This is Monroe, Connecticut. I don't think you need 5 gas stations within 2 miles. That said, what I want to say is that a lot of you were here when we talked about the gas station that they're going to put behind my house. That gas station was discussed a while back, and the consensus of the conversations between whoever was here at that time, and I don't remember all your names, but you were talking about if you really needed that gas station because you had the other gas stations. Now you're going to put that gas station in, and you're going to have another gas station. Do you really need that many? That was my point number 1. Point number 2, and I'm going to go back 20-something years now. If a lot of you recall, that little curvature that comes out on Spring Hill Road, that used to come straight out where the road was, and they made a dead-end street. The reason they made that dead-end street there was because there was too much traffic on the corner of Purdy Hill Road and Spring Hill Road with a lot of streets coming together. And they wanted to put other factories, Goodwill, whatever in there. What you're doing right now is you're basically putting more streets coming from the gas station onto that section, which, yes, in your point, it's going to cause more traffic, but the reason that cutoff was put in there was to avoid the traffic on that corner. And I was part of that when this committee was talking about that, and that's where that road came from. Every time I come here, I mean, I ask the committee to think about the people that live there. Every time I come here, I know my property values are going down. They're going to go down behind my house. They're going to go down at the end of the street. And I'm really getting a little tired of coming and trying to defend my property and everybody else's properties, but I really don't think you need another gas station. The next point that I wanted to talk about very briefly was the change in the zone, okay? You pointed out, Mr. Porter, you changed that over there. We're going to have to start talking about behind my house again, because we just went through this a couple of years ago, talking about 350 feet and how good that was going to be and how tight it was going to be at 100. And if you change it here, is it going to change there? We're going to start having those conversations again. I don't know, but I'm more concerned about behind my house, just as now I'm concerned about what's going on here. And the last point I want to make, which this gentleman kind of brought up, and I'm not going to say you shot him down, but I wouldn't have known about this if I didn't hear about it from some people in conversation. The gentleman on my left actually called me up and asked me if I could get some people to come. I didn't have enough time. I don't know about these things. They seem to just come out of the woodwork. Obviously, something's going to happen there sooner or later, but we have to have a way of knowing. And I think that if more people knew about it, and not getting the Voice newspaper, I just don't go wake up in the morning. Yeah, I do read the obituaries to see who passed away, but I don't go on there to see, okay, what's Monroe going to do that I got to go try to defend today? And it's getting very difficult to do that. So communication, I just wanted to say on this is, to me, is very important. But
How would we do that?
I don't know.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for you. I'm just saying, how am I supposed to know? You know, that's what it came down to. So I talked about the stations, I talked about notifying, I talked about the change of the area, and I also talked about the traffic, and more important about that cutout. I got nothing against Cumberland Farms. I just got something against Cumberland Farms or something on that end of the street. So that's all I got, and I thank you. Does anybody got any questions for me? I'd be happy to. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Second, sir.
Gentlemen, my name is Greg Citrano, and my wife Mary Alice couldn't be here tonight, but she still wanted to be heard. Thank you for your time in advance. So I am the
current. State your address for the record, please.
right there. I'm the current property owner of 165 and 159 Purdy Hill, which is at the end right over here. So our property directly abuts 255 Monroe Turnpike. Obviously, we're opposed to the proposed text amendment and development of Cumberland Farms for the following reasons. First off, if you were including the gas station on the Trumbull-Monroe line, it's actually 6 gas stations because there's one across from Big Y as well. But the request for the text amendment to decrease the setback for 350 feet from any residential district to 100, I think is pretty unreasonable, particularly considering where I live. We have wells and water and septic. Special conditions are suggested are basically current state and federal regulations with vague description of landscape screening, which I guess you did make a little bit more clear. I know in the past a 350-foot setback was seriously considered by all of you when the limited office zone was changed to include to the retail. At that time, the setback for a gas station was put in at 350 feet with a special, with need of a special permit at that time. There is nothing convincing that supports the need of this gas station with a 2-mile radius, considering all the others that are here. The 100-foot setback is proposed as a general text amendment. The request states that amending the text will benefit other properties in the LOR district. The only other property it could potentially benefit is the town line one, considering they could alter that 350 feet to 100. But I don't see anything close to where anyone else can benefit from that standpoint. Traffic's already at capacity at this Burton intersection. There's no doubt about that. There's going to be an increase in noise, odor, light, and chemical pollution. From our house, we could already see the traffic light. Now, when this comes in, I'm sure that no matter where you set the lights, that they're going to be pretty visible. There's going to be significant decrease in the neighborhood property values, major concern, and particularly in the immediate surrounding properties, i.e. my own, I'm sure that it may even make it unsellable at that point. So not only decrease, but it might be unsellable. Personal level, I guess for ourselves and surrounding residents, we have the wells and the septic. I'm repeating that, the leaching fields, very concerned and worried about that. Our wells and septic are on that side of the property that's going to be close to them. We definitely support town's goal of conservation development. You know, we're looking forward to the progress and the increased revenue for the town, but I really believe that there's better use for that. What else did I want to talk about? So the Cumberland Farms needs can only be met in the LOR district at the expense of us, the residents, in this case. A 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation belongs more in the business zone. This, as you were stating, you know, it's not considering people, the hanging out. I didn't want to bring that up tonight, but I know that at the other one that there has been because we've driven by, because obviously we have some interest in that. So I think it comes down to this. Cumberland Farms, they want to build on a property that can't meet its requirements. That's the bottom line. So they want to change the requirements to meet their needs. The only problem is that it may be unsafe and harmful to the immediate surrounding region. Again, our property values are going to take a nosedive. I don't believe we're that kind of a town, and I believe that that particular property in question is destined for something better for the town. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Settigren, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Sure. Roger Settergren, 300 Teller Road, Monroe. And I think because of the communications I said before with no paper, we've got to trust in you that you'll make the right decisions and will be more thoughtful of the town instead of an applicant for whatever. If it was a variance of 5 or 10 feet, fine. This is ridiculous. And the second thing I'd like to say is their Cumberland Farm on 25 was put in. I drove auto parts daily for a company on Route 25. And on one occasion, as I swung into go north on, I believe it's Stanley Road. Here comes a car out. It's no left turn, but it was shorter going that way than it is going up Stanley Road and back out onto Route 59. And I think you're gonna find this is that they can find shortcuts by going through people's front yards. They're gonna do it. And I just don't think it's right. I've got to trust in you to make the right decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition? Is there anyone who has any general questions or comments?
Just a minor one. I was thinking about a question that was posed to me by Ryan. How do you notify people? You notify them when you're going to build 500 feet within their property. Maybe when you're doing something like this, a mailing out to everyone who's affected might solve the problem. I was just thinking.
So now with this, it's not just about the neighboring, because it's not about this property, it's about all the properties. This doesn't just affect you guys if we approve this amendment, it affects everyone abutting an LOR zone.
Then
So
those
that would be a mailer to everyone.
There are a
They're the
couple of
people you're
methods that are
affecting.
set up. There's a listserv that you can get on, and every meeting and agenda gets emailed to you. Or they're posted on the town website. All the meetings are posted, the agendas are all posted. And I know this particular public hearing notice was in the Voices newspaper, and it was also in the Connecticut Post.
A lot of people don't. Yeah, I know this meeting's not about this. I just was trying to answer his question. Not going to solve that one
Yeah,
here tonight, but.
I understand, it's difficult. Everyone relied on the courier, but there are alternate means of getting the information.
I understand that. I know there's a whole bunch of you, and there's only a couple of us to get the information out, but, you know, again, that's not for this meeting. I just was trying to make conversation.
No.
All right.
Thank you, we appreciate you coming out too and talking.
Anyone else with any general questions or comments? Okay, back to you, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On a site development application, I would say a lot more in response to some of the comments that were made. I respect that you're allowing the public to be heard, but I just want to make sure the commissioner understands that most of those topics that came up in terms of the traffic or impacts on property values or odor, you know, although other than we're trying to put some standards in place to make sure you get the information, all of those things would be looked at on a specific site development application. So I'm not going to try to tackle them right now, given the comments you made to me at the beginning. And you were right, Mr. Chairman, that this is not an application to develop one particular site, but we can and we would address all of those things in terms of the traffic and the layout and the alignment and the access to this site and how we would prevent impacts to residential properties and their property values and noise and light and all of those things. We're just trying to put some standards into place right now that would allow an application to come forward. And that's really the question before this commission. Will you allow yourself the flexibility just to look at an application? It doesn't endorse a particular development. It doesn't allow any certain development. It certainly wouldn't allow a gas station as of right on this site or anywhere. It would simply say, if you want the separation to be less than 350 feet, you have to, at the very least, show us these things, and you have to meet these additional requirements for the gas component in particular. And from there, the commission gets to exercise its discretion, require the information that you are allowed to require, and decide if you're going to grant it, and you don't have to grant it on a particular development application. So that's all you would be doing if you were to grant this amendment, is to basically open the door to an application to look at a site, and it doesn't mean that you have to allow it to go forward. So that's our request, and we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone?
No, sir.
No.
Mr. Williams, would you not agree, though, the drafting of standards and zoning really does go to the issues of property impacts and property values, and it kind of does set the framework for those things happening or not happening?
You want to have that discussion as a general matter? I mean, sure, the regulations are designed to ensure that those issues are looked at, And my point is, they would be looked at on a particular application because the commission doesn't have one before them that proposes any specific amount of separation or that proposes to develop a site of any site. So my point is, all of the components that go into a property value determination would come before the commission, and they would need to look at it on a site development application. And this text amendment doesn't decide that. You have to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
I agree with you. I don't disagree with that, but I was just wondering if you agreed that setting up zones, setbacks, landscape requirements, lighting requirements, those things all go into the issues of location and compatibility between properties and between different zones.
Sure, those are topics that matter to property values. But you have to get the information and see if the particular development is going to create that impact. But the regulation should ask those questions.
Okay.
I don't disagree at all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, what does the commission think? Close the hearing?
Close.
Close it.
Close.
Okay. This hearing is closed. 8:41 PM. What's that? No, we're not taking a break yet. Just give me a second to get. Okay. Next up, item number 8. For the sake of expediency, I'm going to read 2 public notices here for the next 2 hearings. Planning and Zoning Commission, Monroe, Connecticut, notice of public hearing to be held on December 20th, 2018. In accordance with Connecticut General Statute 8-7D, a public hearing will be held in the Town Hall Council Chamber, 7 Fan Hill Road, Monroe, Connecticut, on Thursday, December 20th, 2018, at 7 p.m. or soon thereafter, concerning the following: ZCA-2018-01, file number 1012D, 234 Main Street, I-1 and RF2 to B2 district. Zone boundary change of approximately 0.304 acres, zoned Industrial District 1 to Business District 2, and approximately 1.210 acres, zoned Residential and Farming District 2 to Business District 2. Petitioner and property owner, 234 Main Street LLC. The second one is SE.
We should keep them separate.
Keep them separate?
Yeah, they're separate hearings.
Even reading the.
Yeah, we should read the hearing notice for the particular application.
Okay. All right. What are
Exhibits?
exhibits?
Exhibit 1, zone boundary change petition. Exhibit 2, zone change map. Exhibit 3, AOT comments from engineer. Exhibit 4, AOT comments from building official. Exhibit 5, AOT planning comments. Exhibit 6, certified mail receipt of a butter notice. That is all.
Okay, for the applicant.
I don't know, is it your stick or my stick?
I have everything, I haven't put my stick in. I've learned that lesson, don't try that.
Anything particular here? I don't know what's on. That's my memo. This is,
The zone change, yeah. But I think I could move right to the site plan. Well, we can start with the zone change.
well, we're dealing with the zone change, Dave,
Okay.
only. We're just doing the zone change. right?
Okay, good evening, members of the commission. My name is David Bjorklund. I'm president of the firm of Spath Bjorklund Associates. We have offices here in Monroe, and I'm a professional engineer registered in the state of Connecticut. The This is the first of two applications that you're going to hear this evening that relate to 234 Main Street. 234 Main Street is where Sippin Energy has been located since the 1950s. It is now a site that has an oil terminal on it, has several buildings that contain other businesses, contains the offices of Sippin Energy. And the reason we're seeking this, the change of zone, is because the Sippins several years ago got into the propane business. And the reason we're seeking the zone change is to expand the business zone so that we could accommodate, in conformance with the regulations, a propane storage terminal. This is, most of the commissioners, this should be fresh in their minds because this was something that we just addressed a couple of years ago. We did a lot of work on the existing Sippin fuel facility, ironing out some zoning inconsistencies that were on the property, straightened out some wetland violations that were on the property. So the existing zone line is here, and all of this property here currently is developed. The driveway to 200 Main Street is located right here along this boundary line. And what we're proposing to do is to move the zone line from this position here to this location here. The rear of the property is here. This area through here is predominated by wetlands. This area through here is, a lot of it is an upland area, which is recently, as a result of the approvals granted by wetlands and by planning and zoning, has been recently planted with evergreen trees and some hardwood trees as a result of the wetland violations. And the reason why we're seeking to move the zone line back is really to this line, you'll see when we get to the site plan, is too close to to comply with your setback, the 30-foot setback buffer from a residential area. We needed to push the zone line back. The zone line had gone, the piece next door, 246, had been pushed back to this location several years ago to accommodate a septic system that's located here for 246. And so in discussing this with Will and with our client, we just said, well, let's just draw it straight across. It really doesn't have any impact because this area has all been planted and it's inland wetlands. The actual development that's going to take place is going to take place right down here in an area that's about 12 or 15 feet lower than this area here. The residential homes on Old Newtown Road are located in this area here, and again, the rear of these lots is very well wooded. It's a 2-acre zone. So pushing the zone line back, I don't think this is going to have any impact on the adjacent residential properties. The development that we're seeking is down in this area, this corner down here. We are doing a little cleanup of some zoning here. It's a result of a septic system being constructed on the lot next door on 200 Main Street. We slid the property line over, but we didn't change the zone at the time. So changing the zone in this area is just what I would call a housekeeping item, just to keep all the land associated with 234 in the business zone, and because what we had was a little strip of IL here.
That line got changed a few years ago.
Right, yeah. And I didn't realize it. I don't know. I don't think anybody, this was really a minor part of that application a couple of years ago. And so when we started working on this, the surveyor, Tracy Lewis, actually pointed it out to our office, and we said, yeah, this is the time to do it. Let's clean it up. So but that's the reason why we're seeking the zone change. It's as a result of my client's request that you'll see in the next application to construct a propane storage terminal in this corner of the property here. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
I have none.
I have none.
No questions.
No questions.
No question.
I don't have any questions.
No questions.
I just had a few minor comments, which are really housekeeping issues to put on the plan and stuff. I don't know if you have any problems with those, but it seems pretty straightforward to me.
But do you want to just run through them?
Sure.
Scott had a couple of comments
Yeah.
also.
One of the things is that in their interim, between the time they submitted and tonight, they actually did a land transfer. There's a small little corner of the property right here, moving a small portion of land from 200 into 234. That map has been recorded, it's on land records, and that now matches, the property line matches where the zone line that they're proposing would fix. So obviously having that map appropriately recorded or noted is one of the things I would ask. The other is meets and bounds description should be directly on the map. They provided a document, but we should put it on the map. And then some labeling, and then the particular note, and obviously we need to fill in if you were to approve this when you do. Scott's were somewhat similar. I was just looking at them. I think the map that was provided relative to the land change is an updated survey, so that kind of satisfies the first comment that Scott had.
Okay.
Meets and bounds, he's just talking about the overall outer meets and bounds, and I don't really see the need for calling parcel A and parcel B. I think that'd be confusing from a land perspective, because we're not talking about lots, we're really talking about changing of a zone line. But I don't think anything here that couldn't be conditional.
Okay, so it's basically just getting information out to the.
It's just housekeeping things, so that when we record this map, that it's clear.
Yeah, I viewed it, it's minor. We just recorded the maps to move the property line to coincide with the zone line last week, so
Okay.
that's.
All right, no questions?
No, sir.
Well, it is a public hearing. Let's see if anyone from the public has any comment. Anyone who would like to speak in favor of this application? Anyone in opposition to this application? Any general questions or comments? Okay, Mr. Bjorkman, back to you.
I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Close it.
Close it. Okay. Hearing is closed. 8:53 p.m. At the request of Commissioner Ambrosi, we're going to take a 5-minute recess. Oh, you're the only one I hear.
I don't know how to ask for a break. No, if you're gonna put it on me, let's keep going.
But he brings Fresca, you know, they still made that stuff.
Well, he bought the rest
Are
of
we
it.
ready?
Fresca. That stuff is.
I love Leon because he talks to himself the whole time. Pretty sure he's talking to you.
Okay, we're back, 9 p.m. Next up, Planning and Zoning Commission, Monroe, Connecticut. Notice of public hearing to be held on December 20th, 2018. In accordance with Connecticut General Statute 8-7D, a public hearing will be held in the Town Hall Council Chamber, 7 Can Hill Road, Monroe, Connecticut, on Thursday, December 20th, 2018, at 7 p.m. or soon thereafter, concerning the following: SEP 2018-10, file number 1605A, 234 Main Street. Special exception permit to install 2 above-ground 30,000-gallon each bulk propane storage tanks consisting of an extension of an existing non-conforming industrial heating fuel bulk terminal and distribution business use, and HVAC service and installation business, in accordance with zoning section 1.9.1C5, within a portion of property zoned Business District 2, including relocation of several parking spaces as well as dumpster facilities for the property. Owner applicant 234 Main Street LLC. Complete details and copies of all related materials associated with the above matters are on file and available for viewing in the Monroe Planning and Zoning Department offices. Well, what do we have for exhibits?
Exhibit 1, special exception permit application, project narrative and adjourners list. Exhibit 2, soils report from Brown Planning Services regarding wetlands. Exhibit 3, bond estimate form by applicant. Exhibit 4, plan set by applicant. Exhibit 5, correspondence regarding revised plans from the applicant. Exhibit 6, revised plans by the applicant. Exhibit 7, ART Architectural Review Board comments, recommendation. Exhibit 8, ART Town Engineer comments. Exhibit 9, bond estimate form from Town Engineer. Exhibit 10, Planning and Zoning ART comments. Exhibit 11, ART Building Official comments. And Exhibit 12, a butters notice, certified mail receipt for the hearing notice. That is all.
Okay, for the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is David Bjorklund. I'm president of the firm of Spat Bjorklund Associates. We have offices here in Monroe. I'm a professional engineer registered in the state of Connecticut.
Is this the wrong one?
Yeah.
Is this one? No. What's that? You want S1?
Yeah, S1.
Want to just focus on the back, or? You want me to zoom in on the back, Dave?
Yeah, zoom in on the terminal area. That's good. That'll start the
It's
conversation.
gonna mess up.
There you go. I can see it now.
Is that good, or you want a little smaller?
No, that works. Yeah. This is the proposed site plan, and again, I think most of the commissioners, and if you weren't here for the deliberations on the last SEP for the entire property at 234 Main Street, out here, this is the main building on 234 Main Street, where the offices are located. These are the two large oil tanks. The oil trucks are stored right here. North of this is the 246 Main Street property. This is a multi-tenant building, both this building here and this building here. When we started to look at the site, we actually, when Dave Sippett and I started talking about this several years ago, we actually started looking at some other pieces of property, and when we finally started to get a feel for how big this facility was going to be, of course, one of the goals was if we could locate it on the 234 Main Street property where Sippett Energy has their offices, all their billing is there, and the oil terminal is there. If we could find a way to locate the propane storage facility on this piece of property, it would be a big plus to have both operations. It's just two different types of fuel, but the distribution is similar. So what we looked at here, and here's the old zone line. What we looked at was this undeveloped corner of the property. This does not interfere in any way. The oil operation, the loading for the oil trucks takes place over here. The truck access is in this area. So that this corner of the property, although used, and it did have access out to this is the driveway for 200 Main Street, which is primarily a multi-use office building, a flex type space. We came to the conclusion that if we could slide the zone line back, and this is a steep embankment here that is probably about a 12 to 15 foot embankment, that if we could nest the two 30,000 gallon tanks and nest them into the side of the hill, that would be an ideal location. We could establish truck access in this fashion here. This actually graphic depicts a truck at this location. And It puts them off in the corner of the site. They're not in the main traffic of the property. Trucks can come in and load and then exit the property. On top of this slope here, there are quite a stand of pine trees that were probably planted 30, 40 years ago that serve as a buffer. You can see these are the trees that were planted as a result of the inland wetland violations, and this is the wetland line. So it's a corner of the property that isn't being utilized at this point in time. It backs up to an area that has a great buffer. Once these trees take hold, the buffer will be even better. And then this is wetlands, just screen it from the adjacent residential properties. This is also depressed topographically, as I said. So the oil tanks are a more prominent feature from a distance. They're higher than what these tanks are going to be. If you're wondering what the tanks are going to look like, the best example I can give you is on Main Street, further south of here in Trumbull, is rural gas. And those tanks that they have in the back of the property would be similar to these. So we're in front of you this evening. We think this is a great location. It works with the piece of property. We have to, as I said in the last application, move the zone line and do a little juggling on the site because we previously had this dedicated to parking in this area. Another change in this application as opposed to the previous application, this is a large dumpster here in which the SIPN installation people, when they do an install and they remove old oil burners, water heaters, piping, it goes into this dumpster. The previous application, we had that dumpster located over here. The problem with it here is that we really want to load this dumpster from the side, not from the end, because they load it with a backhoe, and then with the backhoe, they can crush it down. So you really need, this location over here didn't work, and when we looked at the site, we said, this works really well here. Again, this is something that's not used daily, but by locating the dumpster here, we're able to get the backhoe right up to the side of it, and get the material in it and compress it along the entire length of the dumpster. You just go over here, and we were just working from the end of the dumpster. The tanks themselves are going to be cradled in 2 concrete cradles, 2 for each tank. It's going to be underlain with crushed stone. They're protected by bollards. And we'll get into the alternatives for bollards in a minute when we get to the staff reports. But it's a pretty simple installation. There is a pump that's located right here for both offloading and unloading the liquid propane. But this area right here will serve both for the delivery of the bulk fuel and the offloading to the trucks for home delivery. So if there is any questions before I get into the staff reports, I'll be glad to entertain them.
Anyone?
I don't have any questions.
No. Why don't we go through the staff?
Okay.
Go back to that.
Starting with Will's, the first comment we've really already, the lot line revision, we've touched on that. Paul Sobel, Dave Sippen's attorney, is also with me this evening, and that number 2 is not a problem. We'll be glad to submit that. The project narrative, that's another Paul Sobel item. The modification of the narrative and the proposed fire and safety control measures. The Sippens have retained an engineering firm that does the siting of propane facilities. That individual couldn't be here tonight, but I didn't see it as a problem, knowing that this is going to lead to another hearing. So the commission, so we'll have somebody at the next meeting to, if the commission desires, to actually talk about the fire and safety control measures. Some of them have already been relayed to us and are reflected on the plan here, but if the commission wants to get into specific details, that's not, it's not my bailiwick, and it's not Paul's either. Will also requested that the project narrative more closely reflect the non-conforming use regulation on the extension of a non-conforming use. And Paul has agreed.
We'll submit a revised
Paul
project narrative.
has agreed to on site planning considerations, number 5, the bollards was the suggestion of the people who did the engineering. We'll discuss that with them. I know a facility that in another town that our office just did, we used what everybody knows is the steel RB40 guardrail around the tanks. So we're going to discuss alternatives. It is an awful lot of bollards, and we'll come back to the commission with an answer on what the alternatives are to that. But as I said, that came from the engineer's suggestion. The section detail for the proposed propane tanks should be expanded as follows. Add the commercial grade weed barrier, that's not a problem. Add detailing of the 3-inch crushed stone base, not a problem. Show the striped area and protective bollards or suggested concrete jersey barriers. Will, I have a question. Is this just you want a detail on the striping?
You have a detail, I just want you to add these things to that detail.
Okay.
So the detail is a little more encompassing.
Okay. A reference to the pedestal construction details, that one I didn't really understand either.
It's just, see that, yeah, because you're showing it, but the detail for it is another location.
Right.
Just tying them together. That's very simple, all that's very simple.
Yeah. And note on the proposed coloring, we said to architectural review.
And they're supposed to be white, aren't they? By
No,
code?
I wanted to do them like that gas tank outside of Boston. The one that is very bright and colorful. Yeah, no, I think everyone I've ever worked on has been white.
They may be white by sticks.
Yeah, I think there's a reason, a solar reason there.
Well, to know what the tank is too,
Yeah.
versus what's in it. Like pipe is different color.
Oxygen is green.
Right, so you know
Right,
what, so the emergency personnel know
Good
just by
point.
looking at it.
The proposed dumpster, yes, that's and the required concrete base, those will be added. As far as the enclosure landscaping goes, as I explained, we really need this whole front area as a working area for the dumpster. We don't have an issue with adding landscaping here to screen the end of the dumpster. We don't have a problem putting it here, but I don't think that really, makes sense. By the time you get to this part of the yard, you're in a commercial.
I think he means more like in front of where the propane truck would be, where your detail, your cross-section A line is, right there.
Right.
Delineate those parking spaces from the truck drive.
Well, that's a separate comment, but yeah. I was commenting about
Right.
what Dave was talking about, the dumpster. The
Yeah,
requirements in their zoning regulations talk about an enclosure and landscaping around the enclosure. So I think what Dave is suggesting, that their operations is more of a, it's more of a working dumpster than it is a garbage dumpster.
Yeah, this is not your typical thing that the garbage truck comes in with the forks and lifts it up. To screen it here, that's not an issue, but we need access all around it. This is, like I said, this is not your typical dumpster. Yeah.
The next one.
Right,
I
yeah,
jumped
right.
ahead.
Yeah, okay. Again, we don't have a problem. We have looked at it. We can relocate some parking so we can't screen. And actually, I think that was one of Scott's comments too, was make a demarcation line there with a landscape island. And similar to the above, a landscape island at minimum stripe area should be shown at the ends of the relocated parking spaces near the existing. Okay, that's over in this area here. Yeah.
Yeah, so at the end, at minimum, you could stripe like you do on the other one.
Right.
Or, you know, we've gone through before about having islands, but I understand the internal part, you don't like that, so at least stripe at the end.
Well, what Scott explained to me, I spoke to him earlier today, is that, you know, on every application, he's looking to reduce the impervious area on the site if possible. So that's why he's thinking more towards islands instead of painted islands,
Right.
because he's always looking, you know, to try to reduce the impervious.
So that we can comply with the general stormwater permit requirements.
Right, and 10 is, again, do some planting here to screen the end of the propane tanks from the driveway to 200. That's not a problem. The chain link fence detail, there are two, an 8-foot and a 6-foot. Again, the higher fence, the 6-foot there's an existing chain link fence that runs along the back of the property here. The 8-foot fence was a detail that was provided to us by the people that actually gave us the schematic diagram for the location of the tanks. We have to ask that question, is 8 foot a requirement? So that's something we'll get clarified. The weight of the propane trucks, we're considering, instead of asphalt here, although the whole yard gets a lot of wheel loading as a result of oil trucks. We had a conversation with Dave Sippen and some of his people that concrete might serve better here. We have concrete here where the oil trucks load presently. We have concrete here where the oil trucks park. So we're going to bring that into consideration. And I think that's the zoning. I think we've touched on the zoning boundary change. If that gets approved, obviously we'll be making those changes.
Yeah, Dave, I think the rest of the comments are more housekeeping things. I don't think there are anything of.
Yeah, I have no, you know, when I go through these, I make comments. I have no comments on we had discussed this, that this pump and shed were where they used to actually fuel the oil trucks. Sippin's no longer fuel the oil trucks here. They're actually fueled down the street at the mobile station. So that's something that's going to go away because it's not used anymore. Yeah, the rest of these I don't think are anything. I think if we need to discuss them, we just get in contact with Will. And for some reason we didn't receive Scott's comments. We checked again at 4 o'clock, and that's so. With regards to Scott's comments, the bond is fine. Dave Sippen just reviewed it. That's not a problem. Again, the landscape island issue, we'll take that into consideration. The grading, that's not an issue. We thought the cross-section was adequate. The end island and the protection and demarcation should be considered as proposed parking areas throughout the site. I have discussed this with Scott. I thought we had addressed these with the last application, so I think we had the same exact conversation. So the drainage, this is another one that we're not increasing the impervious area as a result of this application. We provided the 2% decrease in the last application. So I'll just take that, I'll just have a conversation
Well,
with Scott.
Dave, technically aren't the tanks going into green area? That's today?
But I don't see those as impervious. The water hits them, rolls off, and hits the crushed stone.
No, I get that, but
Yeah.
that generally is considered crushed stone, and tanks are not usually treated the same as lawn, but that's something to ask Scott about. But yeah, I know it's
2% is.
Yeah, it's a small de minimis here. I mean, if you do the island or two that we're talking at the other end, you may achieve some of it anyway.
Right. Yeah. So that concludes the review of the staff comments. Yeah. I don't.
So there's no major stumbling blocks?
No.
All right.
We can work our way through these pretty quickly and get back to the commission by the
Does
next
anybody
meeting.
have questions now?
No. Just, I have one.
Okay.
What are you putting in this dumpster?
Dave, do you want to address what goes in the dumpster?
Happy to. Dave Sippin, President of Sippin Energy Products and 234 Main Street. It's a metal dumpster, so when we remove old furnaces and boilers and hot water heaters, piping, we dump it in there, kind of crush it, and then a scrap metal company periodically removes it from the property. So that's what that's used for.
Is that covered or no?
No, it's not. I think it's just open to the air. You know, because
With the old furnaces and everything, you don't have any oil leaks?
no.
Stuff?
Yeah, we would not be allowed to put anything with oil. You know, we don't we don't deal with oil tanks. No oil tanks are in there. Those are taken out by an environmental company. So these would just be dry furnaces and boilers and hot water tanks that are placed. Yeah, just scrap metal basically.
I just was wondering what you're storing there.
Yep, that's all it is.
That's all I have to know.
Anything?
Well, you mentioned safety. I'd like to hear more about that, but I guess you'll have an expert.
We haven't quite signed the contract, but we retained a contractor that builds this whole terminal, and they work with a mechanical engineer. And we can have him at the next meeting or address any safety. If you have any safety questions, we can go over that.
Basically, just go over that with them.
Yep. Yep.
That'll work.
So can we talk about turnaround time and whether we can make the next meeting or not?
Sure.
That was what was on my mind with what the next 2 weeks are going to bring to all of us.
Yeah, they're
When-
kind of difficult because obviously we're closed the 25th and 26th. We would have to have them really the week from today, which is the 27th. I don't know if that's enough time
Well,
given the holiday.
I'm
That's up to you.
not going back to the office tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
So- You got tomorrow.
I'll
You
be
got tomorrow and
divorced. If you want to
Monday.
handle my divorce,
What, the 26th would be our cutoff for the next meeting, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, but the offices are closed, so we
You're
would.
closed?
Yeah, aren't we closed?
Yeah. So when is the second meeting in January? That sounds like a more reasonable goal.
We don't have to kill ourselves.
Yeah, so the next meeting would be the, is it the 17th?
17th.
So that would be really the 8th or 9th.
That's comfortable, yeah. That works.
Okay. Okay, let's see if we have any public comment.
Okay.
Is there anyone here who would like to speak in favor of this application? Anyone who's opposed to this application? Any general questions or comments? All right, back to you, Dave.
Thank you. Everybody have a great holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, this is continued till the 17th.
Thank you.
9:26. Two hours to go.
get Leon upset, please.
Okay. Next up, item number 10, time extensions. 13-1-SEP, file 15188, 579 Main Street, McDonald's Corporation. Request for a 90-day extension of time. Oh, anybody here representing McDonald's Corporation?
Bill, you're using the draft.
Am I using? No, I'm not using the draft.
Yes, you are.
It says
It says
draft.
Oh.
Hold up, you may not be up yet.
Yeah, now your turn, sorry.
Not your turn.
Okay, get rid of that. Next up, time extensions. SDP 2017-06, file number 126, 814 Main Street. Request for a 90-day extension of time to file final plans and record approval. Extension to May 1st, 2019 to complete all previously approved site plan improvements. We have a letter from a Brighter Future LLC regarding 814. Request extensions as follows related to the above referenced matter. Request for a 90-day extension of time to March 16, 2019 to submit final plans for approval resolution. Extension to May 1st, 2019 to complete the approved site plan improvements. Thank you very much for your time, consideration, and patience.
This is
still the state?
This is the law office, the house conversion to the law office. They did get approval from their plans for the state, but obviously we got into a point now where they have to take those plans and finish off the ROA, which is complying with your conditions, and we're also in a state of the winter, so they're kind of at a stalemate in both those things. They're working on the engineering plans. I do expect them any day. They've been very cooperative as far as trying to turn things around when they can.
Cool.
So it's primarily getting through the state process?
Yeah, the state held them up quite a bit, and in the end, you're gonna see a big driveway.
You're gonna see what?
A big driveway in front of the property.
Oh, okay. All right, so we have a request for a 90-day extension and an extension until May 1st to complete the site plan improvements. Chair will entertain a motion. Anyone?
Motion to approve SDP 2017-06, file number 126-814 Main Street to May 1st, 2019, 90-day extension.
Second.
Who seconded?
John.
All right, any further discussion? No. Call the roll.
Formicella, yes. Mayne, yes.
Ambrosi, yes.
Porter, yes.
Lisa, yes.
Okay, next. SDP 2018-01, file number 127, 550, 560 Main Street. Request for a 30-day extension of time to file final plans and record approval.
This is Nagy Brothers, you remember that little tiny log cabin building?
Yep.
He actually has done all the improvements. He has not given us the final plans. He has not recorded his approval on the land records. So obviously we hadn't had a pre-construction and we haven't inspected the premises. So he's still got to do that housekeeping work so that when he finds somebody, he can just get a permit. So he was running out of time. January 1st was his deadline. We've been trying to contact him over the last couple of months. When he realized he was going to expire, he complied and put in this extension request, realizing that he's not going to get what he needs to be done in the time frame because it would have expired before we could have finished with him.
Okay, we have a letter from Mr. Nagy dated December 19th. I respectfully request a 30-day extension of time to submit final site plans revised as required for endorsement per the Commission's July 5th, 2018 approval resolution in regard to the above referenced matter. So you have been in touch with him and he is
Yeah, we were talking to him yesterday.
Okay. All right.
In fact, we reached out to him for him to ask for the extension.
Okay. We have a motion?
Motion to approve a 30-day extension of time for SDP 2018-01, file number 127, 550, 560 Main Street.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Foreman Kelly, yes.
Mayne, yes.
Ambrosi, yes.
Porter, yes.
Lisa, yes.
Okay, now, 13-2, ZCA, file number 993D, 579 Main Street, McDonald's Corporation, request for a 90-day extension of time to file final plans and record approval. For the applicant.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. Commissioners, good to be with you tonight. Chris Russo, on behalf of McDonald's Corporation, attorney with offices at One Post Road in Fairfield. Know you're very familiar with this project. To provide an update, and I think I spoke about this at the last time we came for an extension request. We have basically gotten everything for to be able to record this approval. We have an approval from Connecticut DOT. I have copies of it here. We have worked out the easement with the town attorney, and that language is all set. The issue is that, and I think we were in the process of this issue last time I was here. In order to move the building permit forward, we have to get an approval on a food service application. To move forward with a food service application, we need an operator. And at the time, the operator who was intended for the site, David Hawthorne, who you might know because he's the operator at the other McDonald's in town, he sold his interest, and so he was no longer going to be, he's no longer the operator at the existing restaurant, he's no longer going to be the operator at the proposed restaurant at 579 Main Street. So McDonald's is searching for another operator who then could apply, put forward the food service application, and then get the building permit. A lot of the building permit issues have been worked out. It's really just this food service application. So we're still waiting on that and their selection of an operator before we can move that forward. Be certain that we're going to, relatively certain that we're going to get a building permit, and then we'll record all the necessary documents. So we're asking for another 90 days to.
This recording is not dependent on a building permit, is it?
No, and actually, you need to have these recorded in order for the building inspector to technically even look at your application.
Right. Well, so a lot of these, prior to actually receiving a building permit, this would have to be recorded. But a lot would be known as to whether or not we're going to get a building permit. A lot of the issues have been worked out. This DOT letter, so a lot of that worked out. The owner of the property does not want to record the easement until he's assured that this site will get a building permit. So we're kind of at a standstill from our end because he won't record the easement and therefore can't record the approval, the special permit approval. Because you have to record the easement first. So that's why we're kind of at this impasse. The hope is an operator selected, the food service application be approved, and
then you're going to want everything turned around in 2 days.
then it would be a domino effect, and the easement would get recorded, the permit would get recorded, and the permit would be approved. So that's kind of where we're at this stage.
And as my emails to you and to SPAD last week, there are some still plan issues.
Some plan that have to be revised. I think once this hurdle is cleared, then a lot of issues will quickly be resolved after that and addressed. But it's really this main hurdle now of finding an operator for that site. And unfortunately, it's not something where other parties such as SPAF or myself could move forward the food service application, you need to have the operator to be able to move that forward.
Okay. Well, thank you for explaining that.
Thank you, a little bit complicated, thank you, appreciate it.
All right, so first up, we have a request for a 90-day extension on 13-2-ZCA. So we'll handle that separately.
Motion to approve 90-day extension of time for 13-2-ZCA, file number 993D, 579 Main Street, McDonald's Corporation.
Second.
Okay, so anybody have any additional questions or comments?
No, sir.
No. Okay, we'll call the roll.
Formicelli, yes.
Mayne, yes.
Ambrosi, yes.
Porter, yes.
VCS.
Okay, then next up, we have 13-1-SEP, file number 1518A, 579 Main Street, request for a 90-day final plans and record approval for the special exception permit. So this, I assume, is the same story.
Yes,
Okay.
same story, thank you.
Motion?
Motion to approve 90-day extension of time for 13-1-SEP, file number 1518A, 579 Main Street, McDonald's Corporation.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion?
No.
Call the roll.
Formicelli, yes.
Mayne, yes.
Ambrosi, yes.
Porter, yes.
VCS.
Okay.
Thanks,
you, Mr.
everyone, happy
Russo.
holidays.
Take care, Chris.
Okay, next up, bond releases or reductions. I tell you, 151, 164, I see is not ready.
Right, you can
Okay.
skip over that.
So we have SCP 201-17, file number 1568A, 455 Main Street, Cumberland Farms. Request for a full final release of $30,000 bond. A bond release report from the town engineer, and I spoke to him this afternoon. According to Scott, everything is done, and he's recommending that we release the entire $30,000 bond.
No, you're skipping that one.
No, we're not doing that. We're doing this.
Oh, okay.
Okay? We're on, well, I said that one's not ready. We have a motion.
Motion to release final bond amount of $30,000 for SEP-201-17, file 1568A, 455 Main Street, Cumberland Farms.
Second.
Motion, we have a second. Any further discussion?
No.
No.
Call the roll.
Formicelli, yes.
Mayne, yes.
Ambrosi, yes.
Porter, yes.
VCS.
Okay. Next up, item number 12, meeting minutes for December 6th. Do we really want to seat people for this? Should we just hold it?
Well, oh, yeah, well, you could do it with three. Well, oh, no, you have to seat somebody.
Which three?
You'd have to seat somebody. You're right. That's up to you.
We're going to hold this for the next meeting. We're tabling the meeting minutes.
Table.
Okay, pending application deliberations determinations. First up, we have SCP 2018-08, file number 1603A, 425 Pepper Street.
Well, actually, you gotta seat all these people, so you could have done the minutes too, because you gotta seat the same people.
Well, I'm thinking we just
It's fine.
hold these because everybody was out that night. 425 Pepper Street and 4 Maple Drive. Everybody,
Well, no, the people that were seated deliberated, they're here. The only one that's not here is Michael.
For 425 Pepper Street?
Yes.
I don't have the papers in front of me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, here it is.
Page 3.
Porter, O'Reilly, Condon, Wilt, Kelly. All right, so we're gonna seat you two gentlemen for this. Okay, 425 Pepper Street. Now I'm back on track. This is the facility on Pepper Street, it's a landscaping, office, and small storage facility located behind. Site access and parking facilities will be improved, and the site will generally be cleaned up and better controlled. Site development plan improvements comply with the underlying applicable I-1 district requirements. The proposed action is consistent with the POCD. Location, nature, height, and design of the proposed facilities will be relatively similar to area existing conditions. No new lighting or signage is proposed. Proposed subsurface sanitary, septic system and water supply resources are adequate for the facility. Adequate off-street parking and loading facilities will be provided and paved. They received the inland wetlands permit. And there'll be no changes to other public facilities necessitated by the proposed project. So again, we had Condon, Wick, and Kelly. We have a motion.
Motion to approve SEP-2018-08, file number 1603A, 425 Pepper Street, I-1 District.
Second.
As drafted.
As drafted.
Is there anything additional that anyone thought was required on this?
No.
No.
Okay, call the roll.
Condon, yes.
Wilk, yes.
Kelly, yes.
Porter, yes. Okay. 4 Maple Drive. We have that.
Same people.
Same people. Okay. The underlying zone for this site is I-1 and B-1. Site includes regulated wetlands and associated 100-foot upland review area. And they have a wetlands permit for that work. No changes to existing water supply or the subsurface septic disposal facilities. No need for a ARB review. The existing Maple Drive access driveway and existing site parking facilities will remain, except the parking spaces, including the ADA handicapped accessible spaces, will be appropriately marked by striping and signage. The proposed driveway complies with the underlying applicable I-1 and B-1 district requirements. The proposed action is consistent with the POCD, and that it proposes to remediate adverse conditions upon the site and area wetlands, and will provide a safer alternative means of site access as noted above. There'll be no changes to the existing buildings, no new lighting or signage. The existing 19 off-street parking spaces will remain, but will be striped and signed. The new driveway will be paved. And that's it.
$5,000 bond.
$5,000 bond.
Motion to approve SEP-2018-09, file number 1604A, 4 Maple Drive, I-1 and B-1 districts.
Second.
As drafted.
As drafted.
Any further discussion? This is fixing up that back lot behind O'Keefe and bringing it into compliance. If there's no further discussion, I'll call the roll.
Condon, yes.
Wilk, yes.
Formicella, yes.
Porter, yes. Okay. Same people. Okay, this is the zoning regulation text amendments, RF 1, 2, and 3 districts for the accessory keeping of animals. This is where we have taken poultry out of the equation for other horses, livestock, and other animals, and made a separate line for them. And we've added in all 3 RF zones, keeping of poultry, and the size of the flock is limited by the setback, not by the acreage. So for more than 12, you need a 100-foot setback, and for 12 or fewer, a 50-foot setback. And any manure piles must be 50 feet from the property line. And this is the same in all 3 RF zones.
Chairman Porter, before we make a motion, there needs to be a change to the language.
Okay.
On section 6, the term fowl is used at the very end of the paragraph. If that was intended or not.
I think we were switching all the poultry.
Yeah.
It's just a typo.
Just type.
Yeah, it should be fixed about it.
All right, so in
That was it.
the motion, we will, good eyes.
I thought I word searched, but.
John Formicella.
Yeah. All right.
Vision.
Motion to approve RAA 2018-04, file number 999E, RF1, RF2, and RF3 district zoning amendments, accessory keeping of animals, with the one correction of fowl to poultry.
In section 3.1.3C6.
Who seconded?
Second.
Right.
Any further discussion? No. Call the roll.
Condon, yes.
Wilk, yes.
Formicella, yes.
Porter, yes. Have our chickens.
The chickens are landed.
Okay, selected items from this agenda.
Are we doing the massive? Is that?
Yeah, good, if you want.
Yes, where is that?
Attached to my memo.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. SCP 2018-11. This was to add the dugouts to the baseball and softball fields at Massac. Subject property is located in an RF2 district. The zoning district permits the existing principal public school use and accessory recreational facilities subject to an SEP. The use and operation of the ball fields remains unchanged. The operation hours will not be changed. The proposed action is consistent with the POCD. The location, nature, height, and design of the proposed facilities will be relatively similar to existing. The fields are not presently lighted, and they're not proposed to be lighted. No changes to other public facilities necessitated by the proposed project. And the commission is granting the requested waivers on the horizontal A2 survey and the vertical T2 survey. And on this one,
Same.
we have the same people.
Motion to approve SEP-2018-11, file number 1606A, Massac High School baseball and softball field dugouts, 1014 Monroe Turnpike.
Second.
Any further discussion?
No.
Nope. No? Call the roll.
Condon, yes?
Wilk, yes.
Formicella, yes.
Porter, yes. Okay. Next up, from this evening, we have RAA 2018-06, file number 1001E, zoning regulation text amendment in the LOR district.
We're going back to what was seated if we start this?
People, yes. Paul, myself, Leon, Bruno, and Jonathan. So, gentlemen, thoughts?
I'm not the first, dude.
Somebody's
We're going down the
got to
line?
start.
There seem to be adequate protections in place for the budding property owners. I'd like an approval drafted.
Why? What do you want?
He's,
For the text amendment.
Yeah. So what would
he
he just
he
say?
said that he thinks that there's adequate
Sorry.
protection.
That there's adequate protection for the residents around the LOR districts.
Right.
And that an approval should be drafted, or we can consider it now, for the reduction of 350 to a 100-foot setback with the additional requirements.
So you're looking to change the setback?
Yes.
Well, it's, what the proposed text amendment is putting forth is that the commission would have the ability, the discretion to reduce. It doesn't just automatically reduce it, it's a discretionary thing based on a set number of criteria.
I'm in the complete opposite as John here. I don't think we should change it at all. I think the way it's written is perfectly fine.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
I think we vetted this out pretty good the last time we did this. We changed this.
Well, that's, since you've all voiced your opinion, I will voice mine. I think that when we made the initial change in the LOR to allow retail gasoline sales, you know, we put a lot of time and effort into establishing that required setback. And I think that the protective measures that we have in place are comparable, if not in excess of what is being proposed, other than the technical standards for the gasoline tank. But I didn't get a definitive answer on whether or not the current EPA and DEP regulations are inadequate to protect the public from gasoline tanks. So I have to be led to believe that the current industry standards and regulatory standards must be somewhat safe.
But even with regardless of all that, even with all, safety measures, and you're still putting a gas station within 100 feet of a residential property.
In a zone that's meant to be a buffer zone.
Exactly. I think that's the key, that it's a transition zone, so there shouldn't be any,
I'm not even overly concerned with the gas station, I'm just overly concerned with what you're doing to the neighbors. And, you've really gotta be selective. I mean, there could be other things, even within that 100-foot buffer that I would still say no to, but it's just for the neighborhoods, you know what I mean, just for the neighboring people. I mean, those districts are, like Bill said, those are, you know, there's properties touching up against it. I mean, they're there for a reason.
Yeah, we only had 3 people come out this evening, and as a couple of them exclaimed, they had no way of, they did not know about this, and, you know, that's not anyone's fault. It was publicly noticed adequately, but the absence of the Monroe Courier, I think, cut down.
It's
on
thrown
the number of
everybody for a
people,
loop.
because when we were looking at this the last time around, there was much more of a public appearance over the gas stations in that zone. So I think that
when we looked into this too, that the 350 setbacks, we also, the gas station could run 24 hours. That could be a big concern too.
Yeah.
And so that's why the setback is put in, to protect the neighbors. You know, the zones that we already have, I mean, it's already the zone that's already zoned for B2, that allows gas stations. There's not much you can do about that as far as the setbacks go, because that's the way it is. But in this zone, we put that for that reason, because we didn't want to encroach on the neighbors.
Well, and as one of the people from the public brought up, Mr. Zumbo, you know, he's right behind the lot, the property that has been approved for a gas station, and, you know, if they haven't started building and this regulation were to be approved, I mean, it's the zone, it's not the lot. So,
right.
You know, that could be, that gas station could be 100 feet from his property. And he, you know, very clearly expressed his displeasure with that. I understand that the proposed regulation gives the commission the ability to evaluate an application, but, you know, anytime that window is open where we're given a set of criteria to establish what the setback should be, it's open to interpretation. And I think it's open to appeal, because if the regulation is not clear of what the setback is, and we have the authority to regulate that setback, it could be called into question every time.
I'm with you.
Which is true. I mean, that they could bring it to be approved for something else, and then they could say, well, why can't you approve it for me? And, you know, they get an appeal on it.
Yeah.
You don't have good reasoning about it. I mean, you'd have to put a lot of stipulations in here in order to cover us, and I don't think it's gonna work.
I tend to agree. Especially when the intent of this area is to be a lower impact buffer zone. We have to protect the residential property owners.
That's the key, that's my
That's
biggest
our
hurdle is,
responsibility.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, I don't really care what goes in that property, but it's gotta be about protecting those.
The zone. This is not about a piece of property, it's about.
I said those properties.
It's
gonna be
complete
those.
zone. It's not just one
I'm
I
property.
said
sorry.
those. I apologize, I was wrong.
I didn't hear you.
It's okay.
Profusely apologize.
You don't need to apologize.
So the majority consensus is to draft a denial?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Just on that. Okay.
Any further discussion?
No, sir. You have anything else?
No.
I'm good.
Okay. We aren't going to bother anything with 234 Main Street since they're coming back.
No, there is one for them that we need, the zone change. for that.
The zone change?
Yeah.
That's right, okay. The zone change, basically, some of you might have been here, that little piece that was cut off on the side, that was a transfer of property from one lot to another, but we didn't realize there were two different zones. So they want to make that little piece consistent with the bigger parcel that it was joined with, and they want to push the other zone line back. So, Paul, me, you, and Bruno, and John, we were seated for this. Let's, draft approval. Approval. Yeah, okay.
Pretty
Draft
straightforward.
approval. And then the SEP on 234 will,
Right.
they'll be coming back.
I think we're done.
We're getting there.
Wow, you are out of control.
Regulatory Review Amendment Work Session. We had a good meeting last week. It was primarily focused on the Stevenson lumber property and just discussions with the potential purchaser of the property, talking about what we can do as a zoning commission to help further develop that property. It's very limited right now because it's a B2 zone, so its uses are limited by that. So we're looking at what some options are and what some potential uses are for the property. So we'll be working on that shortly after the holidays. I'll be working on it more. We haven't scheduled one yet.
Okay, guys.
We're not gonna schedule anything before our next commission meeting.
Because I'm not gonna be here anyway.
So, at our next commission meeting, we'll talk about a schedule for the subcommittee meeting.
When is our next meeting?
The third?
The third.
Yeah, unfortunately, I won't be here, I'll be in Dallas.
We'll miss you.
I will miss you guys. You will all get photos of me in Dallas.
Okay, moving along. Item number 15, correspondence other received. Received a memo from First Selectman Kellogg, a request to review Regulation 6.7.2. Members of the EDC have brought to his attention that our current regulations require a minimum of 50 indoor seats for a restaurant to have to serve alcoholic beverages. And there's some concerns that that's limiting some of the smaller restaurants and hampering their business. So we're going to be taking a look at that in the subcommittee, and then we'll be coming forward with our findings to the full commission.
So they want to reduce that number?
They want to reduce the number.
To like 20 seats or something? Or they haven't come up with?
No, we
That's
just.
for you guys to discuss?
That's something that we, Will's gonna do an analysis of, I think Will's gonna do it,
Yeah, I started on it, Mr. Chairman.
or Rick's gonna do it, some analysis of what some of the neighboring communities have for requirements. I don't know where that 50 number came from, it's
Yeah.
been there as long as.
Yeah,
I've been
quickly, none of
around.
the area towns have that. That's a
Yeah,
unique
right.
thing to Monroe. Most commissioners regulate it through special exception. So you pull in the parking, traffic, et cetera, but not the minimal seating.
I believe it's a holdback from back in the days, the blue laws,
Yeah.
and things like that, and it's also about, I'm only guessing from experience that it would have been probably because limiting takeout places, not having alcohol in this restaurant,
Yeah,
and not having every little location have it, but that's, again, a very old model.
You still have to go through the liquor permit process regardless.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
So, in reference to that, I talked to somebody in the EDC, they want to come to our subcommittee, so you can reach out to, I know Dave Gizmar.
Yeah, he's been to us before.
Right, well, he wants to be notified when that's gonna come up.
I think, is he on the list?
I don't know if he's
Tell
on
him
the
to
list
join
or
the
not.
listserv.
I'm just saying, if
I
you
think
could-
he is, he
Yeah,
gets
just
served, he
so
gets
that-
served. He gets served.
Okay. Chairman's report. Hope everyone has a wonderful Christmas and New Year's. And, any other commissioners have anything to report?
We hope you have a wonderful
Thank you.
Christmas and New Year's. As well as the first select.
Staff, your turn.
Only said I'd have to.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna be putting my report for the January 3rd.
Okay,
Have nothing.
nothing?
Nothing.
That's it?
Not the gavel. Leon has to go home.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
10:07.